Welcome to Beneath the Bible, where we're helping you dig deeper and uncover the world beneath the sacred book. Now, if you spent any significant time around a church, you're probably familiar with the story of Elijah and his contest with the prophets of Baal. Perhaps you can picture the old flannel graph cutouts and remember the Sunday school rendition of this story. Now, there's a reason that many of us know this story, and there's a reason that it sticks with us. It has humor, it has drama, there's action and adventure. The stakes are high for everyone involved. Plus, there's fire raining down from the sky, a hallmark of any good Bible story. But there's a lot going on in this story that doesn't easily convert to flannel. Today, we want to take a look at the god Baal as we see him in the Bible. He's certainly a rival of Yahweh and a competitor for Israel's devotion and worship. But what else can we know about him? What are our sources for learning about Baal besides the Bible itself? Now, we'll tell you right now, there is a lot to cover on this topic, and we're only going to cover the basics today. Now, this is still going to be a long video, so here's what we're going to cover. First, we'll look at where we see Baal in the Bible. Next, we'll look at a debate about the word Baal itself. Was it a proper name, or was it a title for a deity? Then we'll look at 4 ways we see Baal depicted in the archaeology of the ancient Near East. And finally, we'll look at how all this knowledge about Baal can help us better understand the Bible. Now, let's look together at the history and archaeology of Baal, the rival of Yahweh. Now, first let's talk about how we're saying the name of this god. You may usually hear it pronounced Baal or Baal, but here at Beneath the Bible, we usually say Baal. Now, this is the best representation of the way the word is written in Hebrew, and we're just trying to be as faithful to the original as possible. Now, here's the word as it's written in Hebrew. We have 3 consonants and 2 vowel markers. Now, Hebrew is read from right to left, unlike English, which is read from left to right. Now, the first consonant makes a B sound, and beneath it is a short A sound. The second consonant is what's called an ayin, which doesn't have an exact equivalent in English, so for us native English speakers, it's kind of a guttural or an even silent consonant. Now, this has another short A sound after it, and the final consonant is ul. So the pronunciation of Baal is closer to the original Hebrew than either Baal or Baal, which either change the vowel sounds or smush them together and drop the middle consonant. Now, when this word shows up in English translations, it usually is a proper noun referring to the god called Baal. Now, this kind of usage appears at least 58 times in the Old Testament, plus 19 times in the plural, the Baals. Now, these all probably refer to one god and his various manifestations who was worshipped in Syria-Palestine in the Bronze and Iron Ages. According to the Bible, this god was also worshipped with various epithets, such as Baal Shemem, the Lord of the Heavens, or Baal Barit, the Lord of the Covenant, as we see in Judges chapters 8 and 9. Now, as I just mentioned, the most famous biblical stories involving Baal are in the lives of Elijah and Elisha, along with the stories of King Ahab and his Canaanite wife, Jezebel. Jezebel was the daughter of King Itto-Baal of Tyre, and the Canaanites worshipped Baal as one of their primary deities. Ahab set up a Baal in a temple in his capital at Samaria, and Elijah preached against the worship of this god by the kingdom of Israel. Now, this story climaxes with his challenge against the prophets of Baal on Mount Carmel, as told in 1 Kings 18. After a long period of drought, Elijah and the prophets of Baal build altars and pray to their respective gods to send fire from heaven to consume the sacrifices on the altar. The prophets of Baal try in vain to get a response from their god, while Elijah's offering is consumed in quite spectacular fashion. And it's pretty clear from this story and others in the biblical text that the Israelites participated in Baal worship to some extent. Hosea and Jeremiah are the 2 prophets who most frequently condemn this practice. And we even see Baal appearing in Israelite names. These are what are called theophoric names. They have all or part of the name of a deity in them. Obadiah, for example, means servant of Yah or Yahweh. Many Israelite names have that Yah element in them somewhere. Elijah, Hezekiah, Isaiah, Jeremiah, and so on. But there are also many Israelite names with Baal or derivations of Baal in them, like Jerubbaal, an alternative name for Gideon. In the biblical text, Jerubbaal is stated to mean, "Let Baal contend against him," but most scholars think this is a later interpretation, since this would mean that the name is a statement against the name bearer. Now, it likely originally meant, "Let Baal show himself great." King Saul named one of his sons Eshbaal, and his grandson, Jonathan's son, was named Meribbaal or Meribaal. King David even named one of his sons Baaliada. So even Israel's greatest heroes utilized names associated with Baal as well as those associated with Yahweh. We do want to note that it isn't always obvious if the Baal theophoric names are referring to the god Baal, or if they are using Baal as a title rather than a proper noun. As a simple noun, Baal can mean an owner of something, a husband, a lord, or a ruler. And we see many of these use cases in the Bible. Baal can be used to refer to regular people, or it can be used as a title for a god rather than a reference to a specific god. Now, in the same way, in Jewish tradition, the name Yahweh is not spoken out of reverence for it. Instead, the word Adonai, meaning my Lord, is substituted. In the ancient world, Baal or Lord seems to have been used in the same way to refer to a god without using their proper name. So in the Bible, Baal is both a specific god and a generic title or honorific, which could be attributed to a god. Hosea 2:18 seems to indicate that Yahweh was even referred to as Baal on occasion. One of David's mighty men, listed in 2 Chronicles 12:5, is named Baaliah, which means Baal is Yahweh. Archaeologists have found the name Yehobaal, which means Yahweh is Baal, on an Israelite seal. All of this complicates our understanding of the relationship between Yahweh and Baal and how the word Baal is used in various places in the Old Testament. The theophoric names with Baal in them could be referencing another god, or even the God of the Bible. Though with the amount of Baal worship described in the Bible, it seems plausible that most of the time the word does refer to the non-biblical god. Now, this is just an overview of how Baal shows up in the Bible. There's a lot more that we could say about Baal in the Bible itself, but now we're going to expand our horizons and look at the historical and archaeological record, where there is a lot more to discover about who this god Baal was.
I'm going to start with a caveat that the origins and various names of Baal are not settled. Just as we saw various uses of the word Baal in the Bible, we see the same complexity in the archaeology and historical record. There's lots of different opinions on who Baal was, depending on the weight given to different data sets. Simply put, it's not clear who the Baal of the Bible was outside the Bible, or at least where he came from. With that said, there are two general schools of thought about the identity of Baal. One is that Baal is the proper name of a Canaanite god. This assertion is supported by data points like an inscription from the 3rd millennium site of Abu Salabik. Archaeologists recovered an inscription there that lists several gods by their proper names, and among them is Baal. This appears to be the earliest reference to Baal that we have, and is found among other proper names of gods, so it's plausible that this is a reference to a god named Baal. At Ugarit, where we find the largest number of textual references to Baal, we see the deity named Baal take on other epithets like Ailan Baal, Baal Zaphon, and even Baal of Ugarit, all proper names. The other school of thought is that Baal is the title for the storm god known as Hadad, or in Mesopotamia, Adad. In this case, Baal is only a title meaning Lord rather than the proper name. Hadad was a storm god from Syria, as worship of Hadad moved into Mesopotamia, he was called Adad. And one cuneiform text even calls him Adad of the Amorites. And both of these figures were understood as storm gods. Depictions and iconography of them clearly link them with the storm. The Babylonian god Marduk, who is also associated with the storm, came to be known as Bel. And this renaming process is essentially the same as what many have already happened with Hadad or Baal Hadad. However, some scholars point out that in some texts, the words Baal for Lord and the proper name are spelled differently, such that it was not a title but a proper name. And proponents of the Baal Hadad theory suggest that in the Middle Bronze Age and earlier, this god was worshipped as Hadad, but over time he was equated with the title Baal. And during the Late Bronze Age, and certainly in the Iron Age, this name transition was complete. The title became the name. The title Baal linked him with one who has dominion and authority as a primary god in the pantheon. So when we see Baal in text found in Syria, it can be seen as Hadad, and when Baal is mentioned in the Bible, it is either referring to the Syrian storm god known as Hadad in the Bronze Age, or it could be referring to a Canaanite god named Baal. Now again, it's not clear which of these perspectives is more accurate. What is clear is that however Baal was originally conceived, as a proper name or as a title, by the Iron Age, Baal and Hadad were separate deities. The Canaanites and Phoenicians worshipped a god named Baal, while Hadad was revered in Syria in the Syro-Hittite and Aramean city-states. Now for the moment, we'll table the debate about whether Baal and Hadad are the same or to what extent they overlap. We are really more focused on the Late Bronze Age and Iron Age Baal for the time being. There's a lot of material in this and we can't come close to covering all of it, so we'll highlight a few things that we think are interesting and important for a general overview of who this figure was. When we look at textual sources, there's quite a bit we could look at and analyze. For example, in the 9th century at the Israelite capital of Samaria were found several ostraca, which are pieces of broken pottery with writing on them. And these ostraca include several personal names. Of these, some names have Yahwistic theophoric names, but others have Baalistic theophoric names. From texts at Ugarit, there are dozens of personal names, including Baalistic theophoric names. And we could spend a lot of time looking at just these names and what these names can tell us about attitudes about Baal. But perhaps the greatest textual source regarding Baal, also from Ugarit, is what is called the Baal cycle. The Baal cycle is a collection of 3 mostly complete stories about how Baal came to be the king of the pantheon of Ugarit. There's a ton we could talk about here. We have an entire video where we look at this story and its interpretation in great detail. You can check it out here. We don't have time to rehash the Baal cycle here, but we'll do our best to cover how these stories help us understand what the people of Ugarit believed about Baal. This sequence of stories has many different interpretations over the years. And we have the text from Ugarit, but we don't really have an explanation of what it meant to them or how it should be interpreted. And scholars have offered several different ideas. One of the first is to see it as a seasonal myth, or a mythicization of natural phenomena. In this case, the changing of the seasons, with the storm god bringing the annual rains. Related to this interpretation is seeing the myth as a ritual expression of the annual cycle. And in this case, the battle between Baal and the sea is heralding the new year, celebrated each fall at Ugarit, in the same way the Enuma Elish featured in the New Year Akitu festival in Babylon. Wrapped up in this interpretation is the idea that Baal was understood to be dead for part of the year since Mot had killed him, but every year he returns and brings the storm with him, and with it vegetation and a seasonal cycle that was celebrated ritually. These interpretations emphasize a fertility aspect of the storm god. Other interpretations focus on the conflict with Yam and Baal's eventual triumph as a metaphor for Baal as an ordering, even creating god. More recent interpretations see political motivations in the composition of the text, where essentially Baal is the champion of the city of Ugarit, and especially of the king of the city. Baal is a stand-in for the king and the city, which was caught between powerful forces. Yam and Mot are the Hittites and the Egyptians, but Baal achieves victory and ultimately kingship. Thus, Baal reflects the city of Ugarit in reality and in vision. We don't have time in this video to dive into all the strengths and weaknesses of these interpretations, and believe me, each model has some strengths and some weaknesses, but that may not be completely necessary. The nature of myth is that it doesn't need to have only one meaning, but can be multivalent and nuanced. While it doesn't mean every interpretation is equally valid, we can look at these various interpretations and see how each may have some relevance and help us gain a better understanding of how Baal was seen in the ancient world. For now, we'll note a few takeaways from the Baal cycle. We see Baal confirmed as the chief god of the Ugaritic pantheon, and he was made king of the gods. He was made king because he was a young, energetic warrior who overcame his chaotic foes and brought order to the world. He's clearly identified as a storm god with his epithets like rider of the clouds, and the fact that he uses his voice of thunder to blast windows into his palace. We can also see some aspects of Baal being a fertility god. In Syria and Canaan, agriculture relied on rain. In places like Mesopotamia and Egypt, seasonal floods and irrigation facilitated farming instead, so the rains were less important. But for Syria and Canaan, rain was all that they had to water their crops, and if it didn't rain, crops didn't grow. Fertility for the land came from the heavens, not from a river or from the ground. So it makes sense that the storm god in this region would also be considered a fertility god, at least as far as the fertility of the land is concerned. In one text, the metaphor of oil and honey is used by Baal to represent plenty or excess, and we should note, however, this association with fertility is not usually emphasized in either text or art for the storm god. Rather, he is more often linked with kingship and conflict as a warrior. Baal seems to be closely associated with the dynastic monarchy of Ugarit. The rise of Baal in many ways parallels the rise of Ugarit and by extension its line of kings. Now, as Baal rose to prominence and became king of the gods in the Baal cycle, we can see the entire story as a propagandistic endeavor to put the rise of Ugaritic kings in a mythic form. But Baal as a warrior is perhaps the most dominant depiction of him. When we see Baal depicted in archaeological sources, what is usually emphasized are his martial aspects. He is shown in a variety of ways, but also in consistent ways, allowing us to identify the depicted deity as Baal. There's a whole book on the iconography and depictions of Baal by Isaac Cornelius, and we'll follow that study here. If you want to do a deep dive on your own, the citation and link to the open access copy are in the description below. Isaac Cornelius' study identifies 4 ways we typically see Baal depicted. First is simply standing, usually with a weapon or a scepter. This is really not a very common depiction. One of the most common ways Baal is depicted is called either the menacing god or the smiting god. In this pose, the god has one foot in front of the other with one arm raised. We have many examples of this form of Baal, even if we just look at the material found at Ugarit. In some of these examples, it's more clear than others that the smiting god held something in his raised arm. In most examples of this, the weapon or scepter is missing because it was either made of a perishable material or as a small piece of metal, it broke, corroded away, or was separated from the figure for one reason or another. The pose is consistent here, even if some other characteristics aren't, like the crown, for example. This pose was commonly used for Near Eastern deities, so we can see from this statue of the so-called ingot god from Enkami in Cyprus. But it's not generally thought that this is a depiction of the storm god. And the pose was probably derived from the Egyptian way of depicting the smiting pharaoh. This form goes back to the earliest days of Egypt and was used to show the pharaoh victorious over his enemies. When Baal is depicted this way, he doesn't have enemies before him, so instead the pose communicates a sense of power. This is particularly clear in this relief carving from Ugarit. Here, Baal is depicted as the warrior from the Baal cycle myth. He has a short kilt, no beard, showing he's youthful, and he stands in the menacing pose with a mace over his head and a spear in the ground. This spear serves 2 purposes. It is his weapon, which could also be understood as a storm, or more specifically lightning. And the spear also links him to fertility, as we see vegetation sprouting from it. The smiting god here communicates Baal victorious over his enemies, with his storm and fertility attributes on full display. Another way deities are depicted in the ancient world is with attribute animals. They can be either standing with them or riding on them. And different deities are consistently depicted with the same animal. For example, Hathor, an Egyptian goddess, is depicted with a cow or even as a cow. El is depicted with or as a bull, and he's even called the bull god. And there are examples of Baal on a bull, a lion, and a horse. Notably not riding on a horse, but on or over a horse. And all of these animals are symbols of power. Horses in the ancient world were weapons of war, and the bull is also a powerful animal and is associated with both militaristic and procreative power. And the lion is a symbol not just of military power, but also of kingship. One final depiction of Baal is as the monster slayer. And this is a common theme we see in glyptic art, that is, on art on seals. The storm god is depicted attacking and defeating a large serpent or dragon. It's important to note this depiction extends to storm gods that aren't Hadad or Baal, but Hadad, Baal is certainly depicted in this way. This is the storm god overcoming a force of chaos, as he does in the first story of the Baal cycle, by defeating Yam and his supporters and bringing life and order. Now, again, this is not a complete discussion of the history and archaeology of Baal, but it's a good start. We hope to do a deeper dive in the future and explore more aspects of this important Near Eastern figure. So if you've liked this so far, be sure to subscribe so you can catch future explorations of it.
The most important thing to understand about Baal in relation to the Bible is that Baal was the primary rival to Yahweh in Israelite society. The Old Testament makes this rivalry pretty obvious, always siding with the worship of Yahweh and warning against the dangers of worshiping Baal. At the same time, as we've explored in other videos, the Israelites adopted many images and attributes of Baal into their depictions and descriptions of Yahweh. In a sense, Yahweh and Baal fit the same theological niche as king of the gods, residing in heaven and having storm attributes. Now, it's possible that many Israelites were more okay with, say, the worship of Asherah and other gods than they were with the worship of Baal because of this rivalry between Baal and Yahweh. A primary appropriation of Baal imagery for Yahweh is in storm imagery. Psalm 29 and other places refer to 7 thunders and lots of other storm references. We find sea myth imagery of Baal used for Yahweh in the creation account of Genesis 1. The city of Zaphon was the divine dwelling place of Baal, but Jerusalem, the dwelling place of Yahweh, is equated with Zaphon in places like Psalm 48. In numerous ways, Yahweh is depicted as occupying the same mythic space and cosmological functions as Baal, putting them in opposition to one another. We see the rivalry between Yahweh and Baal play out in the conflict between Elijah and the prophets of Baal on Mount Carmel. Ahab and Jezebel worship Baal Hadad, so Yahweh brings drought. This is a direct attack against Baal. If he's the storm god and the god of fertility, he should be able to bring the rain and sustain the land, overcoming the withdrawal of rain by Yahweh. The Elijah narrative is specifically targeting this attribute of Baal and highlighting the power of Yahweh over the domains of Baal. And we can clearly see the polemical function of this story in elevating Yahweh worship and denigrating Baal worship in Israel. Another place we see Baal imagery attributed to Yahweh is in the resurrection imagery of the Old Testament. We find this in Hosea, in Isaiah 26, and in Daniel 12, where resurrection is understood as return from exile. There's a development of this resurrection imagery in the Old Testament going back to Hosea, which seems to borrow strongly from literature about Baal's death and resurrection from the netherworld and his conflict with Mot. This is an interesting development when we think about the political dimension of things like the Baal cycle. The Baal cycle, in one interpretation, represents the rise of the kingdom of Ugarit, symbolized by the ascent of Baal to kingship over the gods. Now, by contrast, Israel's use of resurrection imagery to represent the return from exile does not involve the death and resurrection of Yahweh himself, but of Yahweh's chosen people. God himself cannot be killed or defeated, and as such, God's people live in the perpetual hope of restoration. In every way that the Old Testament borrows Baal imagery and attributes it to Yahweh, it also asserts the surpassing greatness of God above any and all rivals. Thanks for joining us for this Beneath the Bible video. If you want to learn more about this topic, we've included some references and resources in the description below. If you enjoyed this video and you want to see more content like it, be sure to subscribe to our channel, give this video a like, and follow us on Twitter and Facebook at Beneath the Bible. If you learned something new today, take a minute to share this video with your friends. And until next time, keep digging.